to introduce themselves just shortly. But first, a quick few house rules, if you will, just to ensure that you have a good experience with this webinar today and that everything goes smoothly. Firstly, my name is Majeure. I'm the conference director for the Saudi Build webinar, and I'll be your host for this evening. Now, if at any point during the webinar you have any questions regarding the platform or regarding any of the other webinars that we're running for the Saudi Build series, you can ask this to myself and my team using the Q&A function that is in the bottom middle of your screen if you're on a computer, or as one of the buttons on your phone if you're on a phone. Of course, I'm sure you will have some questions that you want to ask the panel directly, which you can also use this function to put forward to them. And in the last 15 minutes of the hour-long webinar, I will ask these questions to them directly as well. If you do want to ask questions to the panel, we suggest you also name who you would like to ask the questions to. So if it's a specific panelist, if it's multiple panelists, the entire panel, or of course, if it's a technical question to myself and the team, then we'd be happy to answer you on that as well. Please do bear in mind that all attendee microphones and webcams are disabled during this webinar, so you will only hear and see from our panel. So again, if you have any questions, you can use the functions to do so, to raise them to us. Finally, a small favor to ask, once the webinar is done, we will have a quick 1-minute survey for you to go over, just to give us an idea of, how this experience was for you and what we can do in future webinars to make sure you have a positive experience with us. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand the reins to our phenomenal moderator for the day, Mr. Andrew, if you would like to take the reins.
Thank you, Maha. Very kind of you to say phenomenal. We're just starting. Maybe we should say phenomenal at the end. Very pleasure for us to be able to address how the sector is going to be looking going forward from the perspective of our different views and our different experiences and the intelligence that we need to keep honest how we go forward. Everybody, I think, is asking the questions and are ready to march forward as we start to see the unlocking come around the world. So I'm very grateful to be here. My name's Andrew Lippett. I'm the leader of the Middle East office for Maxwell Stamp, Saudi Arabia. We're economic and financial advisory, finding ourselves in very interesting times with the questions being asked by the government and public offices and ministries and authorities. So it's really interesting. I think if you look at life as a glass half full rather than half empty, there are opportunities in front of us to make a difference and to have some impact and be collectively positive and contributing to what's ahead of us. So I'm not going to introduce the panelists. I know you've got a few minutes each to do that because I wouldn't do you justice. So if I would start with Dr. Giancarlo, could you share an intro about yourself and then we'll move around. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Giancarlo Mangone. I'm currently leading the strategic planning for a major corporation in Abu Dhabi. We're focused on expanding a 25,000 person city and major industrial area into over 100,000 residents and being a globally competitive, both industrial area and leading livable, smart and local economy driven city of the future. So, which probably sounds familiar for all the Saudi Giga projects. I'm also a principal of the strategic planning and sustainable design firm Symbiosis. So with my company, I consult for developers, governments, and strategic planning consultants throughout the world on various community development projects, trying to create, working with them to help them deliver world-leading solutions, focus on sustainability, livability, and local economies. I previously worked for Burrell Happold in Saudi Arabia. I led the NEOM's sustainability framework and design guidelines. I developed the food strategy for Amala, worked on the King Salman Park design competition, and was involved with Central Riyadh's socioeconomic development strategy, among other projects in Saudi.
Thanks, Dr. Giancarlo. I feel a little bit outnumbered here as the only civil engineer amongst 3 architects. So I hope you'll be kind to me as your moderator. I'm going to, Kourosh, if you don't mind, you have 25 years experience internationally, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure to meet you. My name is Kourosh Salehi. I'm a British architect. It's kind of you to say 25 years experience. That makes me younger. It's coming to 30 years international experience. Been in the region for the last 10 years, previously from the UK, largely operating from London, traveling and operating the Asian markets around the Beijing Olympics. I then the last 10 years I've relocated to the Middle East, was principal architect with Atkins for just about 7 years. And I'm now the design director, the regional design director, all these grand titles of LWK. LWK is a Hong Kong-based multidisciplinary company with over 900 designers and architects and landscapes and urbanists in Hong Kong. LWK, although we've been going just under 2 years in the region, we've managed to get engaged in a number of both UAE and regional projects, I'm delighted to say, but mainly as thought leaders, urbanists, and obviously architects.
Thanks, Kourosh. Last but not least, Ben, as a partner and principal in Killer, welcome.
Thank you very much. So my name is Ben Piper. I've been working as an architect in the region for about 15 years now. Previous to that was working around in Europe and the US and China, but have really been transfixed by the possibilities of this particular region, you know, to make a big difference, you know, to the skyline, but also to how people can think about buildings, how people can think about cities, you know, with all of the growth that's been ongoing here. So I've been around here long enough to see the ebb and the flow, you know, the last crisis, and here somehow I feel a little seasoned having lived through the other one. And it's interesting to see, you know, how quickly sentiment changes. And I like what you said about the kind of the glass half full type of attitude. I mean, you know, the world is constantly changing and we really have to adapt to see the kind of opportunities in that. So as a firm, we at Killer Design, I'm a partner principal in Killer Design. We really like to push the cutting edge in terms of projects that set new kind of standards or new ways of approaching the built environment. And so we've been lucky enough to be involved in quite a number of interesting projects at an intimate scale for some high-end residential and government projects, at the sort of civic scale with the Museum of the Future, which is under construction, due to be completed shortly, and also some large-scale master plans in Saudi itself, which we're currently deeply involved with. So I think it's hopefully we can bring something to the table, and hopefully we can all see at least how we can shift our perspective in looking at the current situation as a glass half full rather than half empty kind of scenario.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. I won't waste any more time in niceties. Let's get straight into some of the questions. I know that we all want to know how we see the health of the market at the moment, with so many impacts from every aspect of that holistic life circle of business, from initiatives from the government here, massive announcements of huge supporting financial initiatives. Yet the big question for us is that flowing through the system to reach and enabling. So I'm going to direct this first question, which is, how do you see the health of the market at the moment? And I'm going to ask Kourosh, please, if you wouldn't mind kicking off. Nice to surprise panelists. How do you see it from where you're looking?
The health of the market. I think it's, I don't know how many minutes I've got. I've been known to ramble, so please feel free to stop me.
Yeah.
I think it is critical to first identify the basis that you've said. We're all very aware of the conditions of COVID. But before that, we had the blow to the oil prices. So with the double impact that regionally and dare I say globally as construction industry is almost one of the first industries to be affected for a number of reasons. I think if we're going to sort of talk about KSA, for instance, is that the Vision 2030, which was regarded as the great engine behind the construction industry, is clearly going to be affected. And some of the larger projects could get delayed. Yet the crisis may also present an opportunity for a new frame of thinking and modification of not only the Saudi, but in the global economy. And hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss that. But there will be some elements which obviously will have an impact on smaller businesses, and it already has. Let's not beat about the bush, but I think in the long term there would be some shifts in the way that we view our industry and how we're going to go about in reconfiguring, in curating our world around us.
Thank you, Hirsch. I want to come to the doctor last. Ben, can you give me your push on this?
Well, look, I think one of the things I've been quite, Gorosh mentioned that construction is one of the first things to be hit. And I thought it was actually quite interesting that construction sites more or less remained open and was somehow seen as a critical activity to society. I felt, hey, well, that's great. At least I'm working in something that really matters. And I suppose it's from two perspectives. One, that it's obviously very disruptive to stop a site halfway through, but you could say the same thing about a hotel. It's highly disruptive to close a hotel. So I thought it was quite interesting, and it seems to be a common pattern around the world that, at least when it comes to construction sites, that there's been an acceptance, even though you do have a scenario that really does bring people, into close contact. So it's been seen as kind of critical, both economically and in terms of the sort of logistical need for society to carry on building. But of course, I think as we all can really share, globally and in such a unique way, it's been really a moment of reflection. And when we came back into the office, I mean, we've been back in for about 2 weeks or so. I got to my desk and I was like, wow, this desk covered in all these papers. I haven't even referred to these for the last, 2.5 months. I guess I don't need that stuff. I'm putting it in the bin. And as I put it in there, I was like, geez, I haven't printed anything for 2.5 months. And I haven't traveled anywhere for 2.5 months. But actually, we carried on pretty much the same in terms of the kind of activities and things like that. And I just think that there is a great opportunity to learn from what we've gone through and are potentially coming out. And I really hope that we don't just return to business as normal. I think that we have real problems, facing this world and society, of which we all have a part to play. The highest temperatures recorded in the Arctic circle ever. And of course, with everything else that's going on, these kind of issues fall to the background. But that is the slow and steady direction in which we're going. So I think that this moment of reflection has been great speaking from a relatively privileged position, that we managed to kind of carry on going, and that we have been, quite lucky thus far in terms of our own business impacts. And I'm aware that probably many people listening in are totally frustrated with the situation and probably had many sort of personal impacts from that. But I think as a society and as a race, I hope we can really learn from that moment of reflection and ask ourselves, do we need to build what we're building? Do we need to do the things that we're doing? And can we do them in slightly different ways that's essentially more sustainable? I know that's a hackneyed phrase, but I was really struck by how incredibly sustainably behaved we have been in this last period of time. And I don't think it's actually been such a terrible burden. Of course, there's been a shift in the economy, and the shift means a kind of a rebalancing. But I actually don't see why some of the patterns of behavior that emerged from this crisis can't be applied, on a more permanent basis, and even in terms of the way we design cities and these kinds of things. In the early days of the internet, this was the panacea, the end of the need for, carbon footprint in travel, the end of, the paperless office and these types of things. But if anything, it's probably increase connectivity around the world and put even more demand on the sort of physical travel, physical global exchange of materials. And these are the kind of issues that we're facing today. And as architects and urbanists, we wield incredible amount of material on behalf of our clients and on behalf of the people that use our buildings. So I hope that something can be garnered from this situation and put into the work that we do in future.
Thanks, Ben. Giancarlo, you come with a unique aspect and a view of the architectural and urban development world with a huge environmental identity. How do you see that as a layer and a focus as everybody has paused? Because we've all paused. A lot of people have gone into paralysis. Some ministries have just gone missing for us. They're like, oh, well, yes, we are here, but we've got no money, and well, we'll see you soon. It's a paralysis. But if you look at the innovation and Saudi's vision is known for one of the pillars of quality of life, and that will remain central to the end of Vision 2030. But you yourself apply a lot of intelligence into that on urban planning. How would you speak to where we are and what it means going forward?
That's a big question. So let me reposition. Look, the market is obviously very risk averse. I mean, we've seen all over the place. For the short and midterm, we don't know what's going on. There's a lot of question marks. So companies across the board have cut expenditures. At the same time, in Abu Dhabi today, we've just announced a $20 billion JV between ADNOC and a global partnership of investment companies to fund the pipelines to then help fund the development of future projects for the UAE economy. So that also is a signal that business life hasn't completely stopped. And there's been a recognition both throughout the region that diversification is key to future success and the future livability and vibrancy of the regional economies. And so I think this actually calls into question the urgency. It increases the urgency of shifting, as Benjamin was saying, to a more diversified economy, which is what Saudi was already doing with the Giga projects. And so as with most disruptions, I think this major disruption, which absolutely is major, will accelerate the changes that are already occurring, which is what always happens during these kind of times. So I'm not sure there will be a return to normal. I think, again, as Benjamin was alluding to in different ways, there is going to be quite a shift to what a new normal is. And so I think there already was a regional focus on the Saudi Giga projects. And now that focus is intensifying as other projects have really fallen away. So there's not as many projects in the region, and so that the focus has become more direct. So I think counter to a lot of the mainstream media claims, I don't believe there's going to be this massive demand for people moving to the suburbs and the rural areas and all of that, which might seem like a tangent, but stay with me for a little bit. I think there's going to be an increasing demand for living in quality places. I think something that all of us have noticed, and I tracked this in the US, was Redfin, the major housing market real estate website, found people were searching, they said, oh, people are searching for suburbs. They're very local, vibrant communities, such as Madison, Wisconsin, which is very walkable and has waterfronts and regional parks and all these very nice quality of life things, farmers markets, just people have a lot of things to do to enjoy themselves there. And so I think that escalates the need for what Saudi needs to prioritize and how we think about, how Saudi thinks about how they move forward with these projects, both from a Giga project point of view, but also from a Jeddah and Riyadh point of view. And what I mean there is I think there really should be a prioritization of increasing living quality places and public spaces that are big enough for social distancing, but still allow for people to get outside and enjoy themselves in a diversity of ways. And we need to, and people want to be near these quality places in a dense manner with a lot of people because they need diverse employment opportunities. And so again, fast tracking the Vision 2030 ambitions of diversifying the economy and creating those anchor industries and foundations is key. And that will make people, that will make the economies resilient to the downturns. And so for me, what this does is it mandates the projects that were already going on in Riyadh, Diriyah, King Salman Park, Qiddiya, delivering those for Riyadh, but really prioritizing those, the public space aspects around them. And for example, King Salman Park is bringing in art and cultural institutions and maker spaces and things like that that are key to Riyadh as well, and tying that to MISC and other projects that are moving forward. So I think it's more about shifting what we prioritize. When we look at the Giga projects, right now, obviously the borders are closed. Even when they start opening, we're having these rebounds all over the world. I don't think it's that intelligent to think about development from a global investor point of view. I know we need it to fund the development, but I think in the short term, we should be repositioning these projects for what kind of service offerings, activities, getaways, hospitality offerings can we give to the local market in the short term, because that's what we can cater to and that's what we can develop. And I think by creating that connection with the local market, by creating these local activities and events, that will actually increase the service offering quality and the local flavor of what these projects are about. Because the value of these Giga projects has always been about the unique, beautiful nature and culture of Saudi Arabia and offering that to the world. So I think this actually gives us an opportunity to really more deeply investigate what that is before we open up to the rest of the world. So I think it's asking for greater inspection of what we do. And the last piece would be investing in those manufacturing industries, bringing those into the cities, connecting them to the universities, expanding research funding and connections between industry and academia in terms of really going after the future tech and the future industries that we want to do. I think we really need to embrace those. And again, we can do that with developing Central Riyadh and some of the other projects.
Thanks, Giancarlo. I know when I see and you listen quietly to what's happening, I know before the pandemic, even here with the massive waves of investment, that somewhere like NEOM was competing with someone like Diriyah for the next tranche of money. But that's not something to be concerned about, because the strength of the direction in the nation is quite unique. It's never been, this kind of transformation and vision has never been seen. I mean, it took the UK and the Europe hundreds of years for an industrial revolution. This 2030 vision will never be seen again on our planet. And that's a personal view that I really think is a stand by. Thank you, Giancarlo. Gentlemen, as architects, you look, I think too, when you look at what we've been going through, we've been shaken. And some of you have mentioned how we've started to prioritize. Now, we prioritize personally because we seek security going forward on our own personal lives. But I think the population of Saudi has been protected and cared for by the leadership of the nation from a health perspective. And a lot of bold moves have been made while the world watches. But I think it makes bold moves from a position of strength. And so one way of looking at what we're seeing is as a pause. And I think, Ben, you touched on it, looking into your life in a micro, we can apply in a macro. What can we do more efficiently? What do we really need? Are there needs assessments? Are there stress tests? We need to prepare for the future. And so I think the construction industry will be benefited in a secondary way also, where nations are starting to look at their supply chain and saying, well, my global supply chain is a risk for me. I need to bring that back in to my own demographic. And so, Giancarlo, you're talking about manufacturing and other things, bringing it back in the nation. I think with some intelligent and visionary adjustments or additions to the vision, there could be some huge secondary benefits to what this pause is actually bringing, remembering glass half full.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, a year ago, we were designing sort of luxury hotels and residential. Now we're looking at how to beautify the facades of major food security projects and such like. So I think what you say about this shaking at the macro scale, the supply chain, and actually I think it's interesting to look at it like that, because what happens in your house is essentially what's happening in the nation. You're like, oh, well, you just can't pop down to the supermarket anymore. We've got to have more in the larder. We've got to make sure we're cleaning all these fruit and veg coming through. So the whole kind of infrastructure actually changes quite dramatically. And I think it's very important that, if one is geared up for, say, the hospitality or high-end residential sector, that there are new kind of opportunities with all of this, you know, rethinking about the self-containment in terms of infrastructure, food security, energy security, and such like. It can be a little bit harder as I mean, maybe as a civil engineer, you'll have more opportunities of that kind. As an aesthetic architect, you know, you have to, you know, you still have to pedal hard to prove, you know, your worth. But there's always a place for good and clever, efficient planning, and hopefully planning that makes the city a better and more beautiful place as well.
No, thank you. Kourosh, what's your view on innovation as architects and leaders of that? I mean, excuse my French, but if there's anybody French on the call, I apologize for that cliche. Normal, new normal, near normal, future normal. I'm weary of normal. Kourosh, you are, as architects, you're looking at
old new normal.
And I see you as architects as having a pivotal role in defining the consequences of this pause. I mean, and innovation, as we've mentioned. Kourosh, where are you on this?
I think I'll look at what the other panelists are saying. But before we specifically zoom in on architecture, I think let us zoom out a little and look at the built environment. Other panelists have alluded to it. The pandemic will undoubtedly be a game changer in many fields. But in design, I'd say it will promote a rethink of the whole urban approach to the way, like I said, we configure and curate our cities. It's going to be increasing imperative to sort of develop scalable, smart city solutions. And believe it or not, a few months ago, I was very wary of these sort of slogans that creep up in the common parlance. One of them was sustainability, because it was, sorry, Giancarlo, because it was becoming a cliche and was very much an abused term, although I fundamentally believe in the principles of social, economical, and environmental sustainability, but it needs to be seen, treated, and addressed holistically, rather than in that prosaic sort of two-dimensional, you know, tick box exercise. And I think that smart city was one of those other phrases that I had problems with, because I felt it was being used as a tool to sort of tick yet another box. But clearly, what COVID has highlighted two conditions. One is that we are more connected and are therefore more affected by major events that we go through, and we thought globally. That's it's really touched all of us: rich, poor, educated, first economies, low, whatever. Prime ministers are getting ill the same way as anyone else. And the other thing is that the health and well-being of the planet clearly does influence and directly impact the health of the global economy. Now, this was an argument that many economists, I don't want to get political here, but many economists and capitalists were using, that commerce does not identify with some of the more, so shall we say, you know, I've got to be careful about my words, but some of the more sort of politically correct sentiments of the liberal elite. But clearly what has been an outcome is the fact that, yes, the actual well-being of the planet, whether it's the environment or pandemics and so on, will hugely affect you know, how we go about our normal lives. So then coming back to the approach to how we go about our health and our education will be the new norm. And I think that the word normal, in best of times, is a questionable term anyway. Who's normal? By whose definition? But nevertheless, again, I think, look, I can go on, but I think I've got a little bit of a token. Giancarlo, you took my, anyway, so I think that we need to readdress some of the fundamentals of approach and debate. I think hopefully there'll be a little bit of time I can talk about the way we curate discourse. But I think as thought leaders, as people who are privileged, and as an architect of 30 odd years, every time I come stand in front of a client group, I feel absolutely privileged to be in the position where I can sort of present an idea. So if we do have that privilege, then we need to address it with a lot more care and look at the fundamentals that impact us. And some of that is to do, like I said, about definitions of what is normal and issues surrounding rapid urbanization, etc.
Thank you, Koresh. We're rapidly approaching in 10 minutes time, the Q&A. But the next question I want to ask each of you, and I'll give you about 2 minutes to 3 minutes each. I want to ask you, what do we do now? And the reference for this is, can we catch up what we have lost, and how? And what does that include? What innovations or developments in our future roadmap will that be? So what can we do now? Can we catch up? And what developments or innovations will support us in that, and how will we see it change? Giancarlo, can I start with you, please?
Sure. I mean, first I'd say we haven't lost that much. I mean, when we take into consideration the regional focus of, in Saudi and in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, there's always this, we need to have this done yesterday already. We're already 2 years behind before we even start the project. There's always that feeling that we need to move fast, and we need to, because of the way the world's changing so quickly. But so I think 2 months, 3 months pause isn't too much of a, I think we're okay. I think, again, as everyone's mentioned, it gives us a chance to reposition, and I know that at least the planning projects have been moving forward. So the overall trajectory of the ship of Vision 2030 hasn't been disrupted too much. I think the question now is really we have to think, okay, from a global investment perspective, there really is this focus now on, some people are saying a more green economy, but overall, even leaving that alone, a local economy and investing in your local community. And as you've said, the redevelopment of more resilient supply chains, and really we're actually starting to look a bit more insular and more regional and creating more regional connections. And so we have that challenge ahead of us in KSA, which is we have these global, we need global investment to help fund these projects. And we want to bring in the global world and invite them to experience everything. At the same time, there's this current shift away from this mentality. And so as I mentioned earlier, I think in the short term, we need to think about how we phase the development of Giga projects to offer local opportunities and events and really enrich the lives of everyone right now, because there's a deep hunger for it. And so also to keep the economic engine going and to provide jobs and keep the advancement of the industries, as I said, by investing now in making the universities more robust with their links to industry, bringing in global research partners, because there's a global hunger for work and research and development. And so bringing these more in, and then still keeping the eye on a more robust service offering in the mid to long term. And in Riyadh in particular, I mean, I think focusing on this metro, opening the metro and getting the metro complete to reduce things like air pollution and to allow more easy movement throughout the city and more fluid movement is also an important thing to consider.
Thanks, Giancarlo. Ben, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think, I mean, I can only speak personally, but I don't feel that we've lost something in this. I don't feel that, that the times of kind of, had we just carried on doing what we had done before for another 3 months, I don't think that's necessarily of such great value. I think what's of great value is that the constraints that were put upon us by the pandemic and the health concerns forced everybody globally to ask themselves, what is essential in what I'm doing here? How can I continue to do those things that are essential? more or less, how can I do them with less reliance on physical infrastructure, energy, what have you. I mean, I remember after the the crisis, sort of visiting a few government buildings to kind of complete some paperwork, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this road that I'm driving on, it didn't need to be here, and this lobby that I'm standing in, it doesn't need to be here, and this air conditioning, all of this infrastructure doesn't need to be here. I just need to process this piece of paper, which could absolutely be done, virtually online. And so I think that the risk that we face is to lose the invention that came out of the so-called mother of necessity. The mother of invention being necessity. And I think that I'm more concerned about that difference of perspective that we might lose as things return back to normal. It just so happens here in Dubai, of course, everybody's aware that the Expo 2020 has been pushed back a year. I don't see that as a loss. I see that as an amazing potential to make the thing 1 year's worth better, more organized, and in fact to have all of that sort of pent up interest and curiosity globally for travel and to see new places and to see new things and to be inspired. I think there's going to be a great burst of energy after this period of rest and reflection. So I think it's been a great thing. And if you look at times of great strife, whether they be warfare or pandemics, and this is really pales in comparison to anything like World War II, say, or the influenza of World War I. But I think that it's really, that's where great strides in innovation take place. The other thing I think that is really important about the way the world works today, and Kourosh mentioned this about the connectivity factor, we are socially so connected that if somebody sneezes in China, we know about it. And I think that if you look, I mean, I was interested in researching kind of global pandemics, through history. This is really quite small scale in terms of what we've been through. We just didn't know we went through it before, and certainly the entire world didn't know about it. And if you look at the numbers of, let's say, the actual health impacts of this recent pandemic versus other less renowned or talked about kinds of diseases that are just part of everyday common conditions, let's say, it's quite striking the number of media mentions of COVID in proportion to the number of actual victims. Whereas if you compare to many of the other diseases, from tuberculosis to hepatitis B to even something simple and curable like diarrhea, which is killing far in excess. So I think that this recent pandemic is actually more to do with our social connectivity and less to do with the actual impact on us as a species. But it just goes to show how far sentiment actually drives the entire system, as we learned from the last global financial crisis. And I think I'm certainly not one to suggest that we shouldn't take these things seriously, and absolutely we should. But we also have to remember that that we live in a time when we're so connected that it can actually make us very fearful, because we're perhaps more aware of everything else outside of our immediate environment and less focused on what's right in front of us and what can we do. Thanks, Ben. Good point. Kourosh, can you close just before I come back in and hand over to Mahad your view on that?
I think I've forgotten your question, but
what can we do now, and can we catch up
from the other panelists? What do we do?
Yeah.
Look, there is a measure of success here, I think, and it needs to be identified. Again, just personal experience and those around me. I think the real success has been the new way that we deliver and engage with our work. The modes of communications have really emerged as the real heroes in the past few months, keeping us all sort of connected, allowing us to work and share ideas, as well as keeping us in touch. Again, Ben makes some great points. I think the remote working is also becoming a more accepted a sort of way to sort of engaging in new opportunities. Another giver trend is the mass adoption of remote working technologies through this pandemic phase. Design, for instance, is is a collaborative process. And believe me, a few months ago, when at our office we decided to sort of work remotely, and I'm still working from my studio. So I still, you know, sometimes some of us are back in the office, but I got so comfortable I stayed. So Ben, you've gone back. But I was very, very skeptical because how can I work with our design team? How can, you know, if I'm not there holding a pencil? How can I work with the clients if I'm not then infusing, putting the heart and soul in an idea? But I've accepted it, that things can be seen in a different way. Both within the team, working with the clients and other consultants. Now, previously we would travel for meetings and presentations as expected service, you see. Now, the past few months, many people have been delivering projects whilst working from, you know, remotely. And the shift in the mindset will continue to evolve over coming months, I would say, and influence the way we engage and deliver design solutions. And finally, if I just add, I think the technology from us may also have to respond to a different reality. You see, sometimes we, you know, the reality is, you know, or technology stays ahead of the game. But I think maybe in this case, the technology has got to respond to this particular reality, and that is to drive to shift the discourse away from faster and cheaper, more towards healthier and more socially sustainable. You see, and also as an architect, you know, I feel that perception and demand on physical spaces will be reevaluated. I think the efficiency and adaptability of a home will be more prominent than the other perceived luxuries like size and location. But that's another subject for another day.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
I'm conscious that we're talking about also the construction sector, and there's a bit of a bridge between now and when Maya's going to go for the Q&A. I think I'm impressed at the nature of the measures taken in Saudi Arabia to bring security in an unknown, and some the world has edged towards hysteria in some narratives, and there's been a stability here. And then I'll give you an example, and I'm not trying to promote any particular authority, but midway through this pandemic, we've received, as a financial and economic organization, a selection of requests for support, RFPs, for example, from the Saudi Contractors Authority. And they're asking themselves, what do we need to do and who do we need to be to facilitate and shore up the myriad of contractors in this sector that are asking very big questions? And that's been extremely impressive for me, because it's shown that the visionary leadership is not just at the top, but is permeated down to a very caring and intelligent professional community, looking how we can capture. And so just to wrap it up, what I sense has come from this has been a time of an opportunity of reflection to become more resilient as we go forward, to readdress our priorities, to forge ahead with the, as humanity, a need to just get out of the blocks again and get running at this. I think possibly with a new energy, a new purpose, and a refined focus. And I think as designers and thinkers of the modern quality of life that you have before you and that mandate, this has been really interesting to see. I've sensed a level of optimism and a level of sanity that we don't hear very often. So gentlemen, thank you. Maya, I'm going to bridge back to you for the Q&A. I don't think I've gone over more than a minute, so thank you.
You're more than fine. Thank you so much, all of you. Honestly, that was a very, very, very engaging panel. Didn't expect everyone to be so lively. So thank you guys so much for the level of enthusiasm with the topic. We've had almost exactly the same kind of enthusiasm from the audience. I've had so many questions that I was actually hoping to do a few polls at the start of this, but I want to just jump in right into the questions to make sure we have at least some time to answer as many of them as possible. So the first one I want to put to all of you, this is a question we got a couple of different ways. but I think that the most sort of eloquently put was from Munich Calif from Quantum Global Solutions in Saudi Arabia. And to roughly summarize a very good question, essentially, contracts in the region do not generally have considerations for force majeure situations regarding pandemics. So when it comes to some of these projects that are ongoing at the moment, and this was something that you did discuss to some extent actually at the overall panel, when it comes to these projects, a lot of the time project owners are still expecting the same original timelines, even though obviously with the government's regulations for health and safety, that's just not feasible or possible. So I don't know if anyone in particular has a preference to answer this. I will give you the reins to start off. But what would your suggestions be to contractors? And what do you think the overall solutions could be? Do you think there's government regulations that need to sort of be implemented to help contractors? Or is it sort of more just ensuring that the project owners and developers sort of have a more realistic approach, maybe push their timelines by 6 months? Anyone at all? Otherwise, I'm just going to pick someone random.
Yeah, look, I mean,
Go ahead, Ben.
Unfortunately, that all sounds great. In fact, quite the reverse has happened. And it seems that many developers have actually exercised their desire to reduce fees that have already been contracted and to expect more for less, simply because the market is suffering, which I do believe that such practices have absolutely been discouraged when it comes to things like food supply, healthcare equipment, and so forth. And I do believe that there is a place for a more firm legislation in those things, which really put many people, contractors, consultants, and others as a great disadvantage. So that would be one point I'd make. More anecdotally, we have had many sites suffering from, let's say, reduced staff, social distancing measures, less fluid movements of the team members, even, for example, the lockdown between Abu Dhabi and the Northern Emirates, which caused a lot of disruptions and things. But I in my role, I'm not actively on site, but I'm involved in quite a number of projects on site, so I kind of get the sense of things. And I've really been struck by how resilient actually the activity of physically building a building is, given all of these incredible challenges. I can only assume that, as you allude, the contractor is not able to exercise any kind of force majeure, so they're still bound by that, and they've been forced to be very creative. But an interesting sort of byproduct is, for example, the site inspections, which may have involved previously, 6 or 7, 8, 10 people walking around together as a group, are now happening via sort of a remote login with one person walking around. So even from a basic health and safety perspective, it's an interesting way to work. And I mean, I was sort of joking with the team about, I wonder if there's a new sort of business plan for being able to rent a drone via Microsoft Teams and just kind of, click, I want drone access in this neighborhood and fly around there. So I do think that there are, like I mentioned before, the constraints are the source of creativity. And I think that the smart contractors are using it as a way to test out kind of new tools and things. And I think, speaking for myself, although Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all these things was around in the background, it wasn't part of our everyday practice. And now it is, because it was forced upon us, and I'm really glad for that. So in summary, I think there's some technological and kind of methodological practices that have been improved, but I think there's a huge place for kind of a government protection and economic support under these kind of conditions. The free market doesn't look after those things on its own.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Anyone else want to jump in there, or should we move on to the next question?
I would just say that Saudi has proven itself in policy to be very careful for its population. And with the Ministry of Labour and the employment accountability being held here, I think that they're not blind to maybe finding any rogue relationships where parties seek to leverage advantage over when we're all in this together. So you would hope that the humanitarian aspect would allow us to communicate away any dead ends or conflicts. But I think Saudi's in a good place to do it. We can only hope that force majeures are cooperative adjustments rather than claiming a contract clause.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Andrew. I want to expand on this. We had another really good question, sort of heading into contracts. We have a lot of contractors in our audience, as is obvious. So this question came from Raju Warrior from Construction Middle East. And to summarize again, essentially because of the current global market dynamics and lower oil prices, construction contract awards have been lowered across the board. Of course, in the kingdom too. This was something we actually mentioned in our very first marketing email, which is one of the reasons we focus on this topic today. So given the fact that contract awards for future projects are sort of slowed down or in hiatus to a large degree, a lot of focus is going into current projects and, you know, managing them and maintaining them well, just as Benjamin mentioned earlier. So along those lines, do you think some of the contractors, obviously, again, feedback, thoughts, opinions from everyone on the panel, do you think some of these contractors who rely on new projects rather than, you know, working on current ones, what do you think they can do? How do you think they can expand what they're doing? Is there any ways that project owners can get more contractors involved in some of these projects, you know, sort of aiming different aspects of it into different projects, breaking it down a bit at this stage after things have already been planned? Again, open to the public. Any one of you want to jump in? Giancarlo and Kurosh, you've been quiet for a while, so maybe one of you would like to jump in here.
I'm happy to sort of get into look, there is a question of governance, and I feel that this is something that we were alluding to, that we, particularly in times of global hardship, I think the level of collective responsibility needs to be looked at. And with collective responsibility, you will be sort of positioned or try to engage in a dialogue, both from every side, you know, whether it's the consultants, whether it's the client's body developer or the contractor. They need to come together. I'm old enough to remember the recession which happened in the late 80s, early 90s. And that was absolutely devastating at the time. Certainly in the UK, but I think just in the Western world. And in fact, we managed to keep our small studio in London going, just purely on the basis that we were working on a housing project for London University, in fact, Queen Mary College. And we got to with the contractor as a team of architects. And we got with the university's sort of development team, and we said, look, we've got these constraints. It can't be just a race to the bottom, because ultimately you would suffer as the sort of the developer or the owner of a product, etc. So it needs to be a solution that works for everybody. And I know that there are many large-scale projects, and there is a remoteness or a lack of willingness to fully engage together. You know, you get an RFP, and then you get a BAFO, and something else I recently learned or heard called a LAFO, you know, the last final. I mean, just beat the consultant, beat the you-know-what out of the contractor, because I'm increasing my profit margins. But there will be repercussions. There will be a shortfall in the detailing, in the procurement process, and the final product will suffer. Now, you just need to be collectively more responsible for what you're engaging and you want to do. I think, again, it's a big subject. We can go on.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kurosh. Giancarlo, if you want to jump into with your current experience in Abu Dhabi and, of course, your past work at NEOM, what are your thoughts on this? What can contractors do? What can project owners do to sort of get people involved a bit more?
It's a very complex question. I mean, the issue we've had over here is that a number of labor camps have actually been quarantined because of the COVID-19, which has actually reduced you know, the manpower capabilities. And there's been quite a cautious approach, not wanting to expose to large-scale testing and not wanting to expose the labor force. And from that, we've actually had a backup in pipeline projects because of this, but we've accepted this as you know, as necessary. So I would say, not from the contractor side, but from design team side, I've noticed on my project, for example, the planning, the design team has learned to check in with us and have, like right after this, I have a check-in meeting before a major deliverable submission by the design team so that we can review it before they submit. And so we reduce the amount of revisions and we reduce the time delays of the project going forward. And so this wasn't happening before the COVID-19 quarantine, partly because even the time of commuting from the design team coming from their office, split between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, to our office in Abu Dhabi, now that that's gone through Teams, we have that time savings. We're actually doing much more fluid engagement. So it's not directly answering the question, but I am just saying there are some opportunities to be gleaned where we actually do have more time efficiency. And it's a bit different for contractors because it's more site work, and you can't get teams to lift an object for you yet. But it is something to take into account.
Perfect. That's actually the perfect segue to my next question. I do just want to say we are a bit short on time. If everyone's okay with it, we're just going to go maybe 5 minutes over. I'm just going to try squeeze a quick poll in and then we can go into the last question. So we've had a lot of time with the panel. I want to give them a 30-second break, but stay in your seats, please. And we want to engage the attendees. We have a quick poll. I mean, before things got to where they are now, before the pandemic started really late last year, the hot topic, one of the hot topics at least, was digitalization and Industry 4.0 as it relates to the construction sector. So what I want to ask the audience is, what are your thoughts on that essentially? How do you think digitalization is going to go forward? Because a lot of companies have actually recently, throughout the hiatus, gone ahead and done a lot of projects in digitalizing their workforce, digitalizing what they're doing, and using things like Teams, as Giancarlo mentioned. So I'll give you about 10, 15 more seconds to answer this. We'll get the results, and then I'll lead that right into our next question.
I can see we can't vote, though. We wouldn't want to be biased.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to be biased at all. But you can see the results, and they are quite interesting, actually. I think we can give it a few more seconds and then go straight to showing everyone else the results as well. All right, so you can all see the results now. Pretty much a majority of people are saying there's still significant work to be done with digitalization. This is a perfect avenue for us to ask one final question to all the panelists now. Again, like I said, digitalization was a very hot topic before everything went the way it did recently. And it has become one of those things that a lot of money can go into now because it is relatively low capital expenditure. And when everyone is looking to squeeze out that little bit of sort of efficiency and productivity as much as they can with the little time that they've sort of lost, digitalization just becomes the perfect avenue to do that. So Andrew, if you want to kick us off, what are your thoughts on this? How do you think it's going to impact the sector? And how much room do you think there is for the Saudi market to continue with this?
Well, thanks, Maya. I think digital transformation is how the sector's calling it, is going to be more than significant. I think in economies of scale, if you look at the Ubers, the Amazons, they're connecting customer to clients seamlessly without, and it's all done on the platform. And so digital transformation, I think, is essential for every sector. And navigating that means that our business models will be wiped clean. And we have to start again with a blank piece of paper, understanding what our objectives are and how we can streamline and do things automatically. And I think that digital transformation, you need to look for those people that are certified practitioners to lead organizations. You need buy-in from the top. There needs to be understanding and awareness. So Maya, I think this is probably the most important question of the future of the whole webinar. And that is, we need to understand, address, and schedule digital transformation from everybody in the holistic cycle in the sector.
Phenomenal. Benjamin, if you would like to jump in here, what are your thoughts again on the same question, digital transformation and the sector?
Sure. Well, look, I think one of the, I suppose as architects, we like to turn dreams into reality, or putting it another way, digital models into physical buildings. And for whatever reason, perhaps it's because we like that sort of sense of physicality or the transformation of physical things. That's the edge that we work at. And, you know, I often think to myself, the sort of theoretical ideal team, you know, where you were working so seamlessly with all consultants and the rest of the architects and the contractor, the process of architecture and building design would be this kind of instantaneous, we all know what we're supposed to do and we just do it. And one of the great things that's come out of this COVID situation, the constraint, the fact that we've been physically removed from each other, is we've had to find another avenue to actually connect with each other. And that avenue is actually far more efficient than how we were doing things in the past. We drive down roads because people used to ride horses down them. I mean, it's kind of, we are in a way tied to the history of technology. And this kind of shock to the system has actually given us a chance to kind of get out of that. And the critical thing is, you can't do it as a single organization or even a single society. It's like globally happened, and we're so interconnected. And this sort of pandemic happened to influence all of us at the same time, so we could all take part in the simultaneous experiment. And so somehow, leading off of the earlier point about what can contractors do, I think that that part of this sort of digitization. Okay, give me 1 second. Yeah. Digitization aspect. Is it something quite urgent? Right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. We will take Benjamin back for
Focus,
a second.
focus.
You see,
this is the reality of
this is the problem of being too connected. But long story short, if you're listening in, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor, please get involved with the design team. Send your details through. Have live calls, you know, while we're sitting in the office and you're on site, and we can see, you know, the problems. It's about connectivity. And the more connected we are, the more intelligent we are, the more efficient we are. And I think we're more connected now than we've been in the past. It comes with its challenges. It comes with its fragility, because if somebody wipes out the internet or drops a magnetic bomb on the servers or whatever, that's a, you know, or some mega digital virus, or the fragility of global travel, which means that we all catch the same cold. But that complexity and connectivity gives us greater intelligence. And so in the past, we would do our drawings and send them off the site, and that's it. And maybe have 1 or 2 meetings with the contractor to kind of tender the thing and maybe pick up a few odd details on site. Now is a great opportunity for contractors to be feeding us with details. Say, hey, have you seen this latest new thing? We're interested in this job. Will you kind of help us out? And we'll support you in getting things done. And it's working pretty well, actually. It's been, I think 2 years ago, it was all BIM. Now the new feeling is seeing everything at the same time. That's from this screen that I'm looking at now, I can connect in a way that wasn't possible before. Not because the technology didn't exist, but because culturally it wasn't being done, because nobody had really done it en masse before. But that's happening. So I think that's a wonderful thing.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Very, very good example, and then real life anecdotal example of how we are too connected. I know we're over time, so I just want to jump in for final thoughts. Giancarlo, we started the question with you. I want to ask it to you one more time. What do you think, what do you think is next? Do you see any more digitalization technologies that are going to sort of impact us in the coming months and years?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about this pause, so to speak, is it actually lets the innovations keep moving forward, because the research labs didn't stop. So I think one thing to keep in mind is offsite manufacturing and the increasing prevalence of that and the increasing dominance of that. So one of the reasons why we are talking about regionalizing supply chains, I mentioned at the very first question, the issue that pandemics and crises don't create new futures, they accelerate already changing conditions. And so one of those has been an increasing re-onshoring of manufacturing because of the increasing automation of manufacturing. And so contractors are going to have to start reckoning with the issue of to be the most competitive, to provide the most timely product and the most cost competitive product. How do we maximize our automation? Unfortunately, that means reducing the construction labor force. And so at a larger scale, it's again, how do we shift those jobs in an effective way and in a socially acceptable way to other jobs within the community? And again, the Vision 2030, it captures all of that. But yeah, I think, you know, contractors more and more need to be making themselves aware of and connecting with these more fabrication labs and research institutes and corporations. Because, you know, we're looking at wind turbines that their costs are going to go down supposedly by 30% because they're going to be able to print the bases on site. And when they do so, circling back to sustainability, they're actually able to mix different materials instead of a pure concrete form. So they're actually able to hit more sustainability targets. And so one of the other issues I think that is happening, and it was touched on earlier, is the question of sustainability. It is a hot topic. It is a lot of greenwashing. But what investors are more commonly looking for is not a certification of LEEDs or USGBC or any of these just national labels, but it's actually looking for a quality of locality and trust and authenticity. And so, and that's what we've been doing, at least, you know, that's what I was working on within the different Giga projects, was how do we create a customized sustainability, which really is about how do we grow the local economy, the local community, make it as livable as possible, as healthy as possible, and as many jobs and prosperous as possible, all while embracing and improving the natural environment. So, I think we're going to have to do things much more thought out, and we're going to have to be much more adaptable and flexible moving forward, because tech is just going to keep changing at faster and faster paces.
Very well put. Perfect. Last but definitely not least, Kurosh, if you would like to share your final thoughts as well on the question of digitalization and innovation as a whole as we go forward, or just overall final thoughts, please.
Am I on mute? No. Am I? Yes. Look, I echo what Ben, Andrew, and Giancarlo have said. I think in the field of design, what has kept us away or has been a barrier between different disciplines has been the fact that people have been put in silos, in the sense that here's the design, there is the technical bit, there is the contractual element, and hey presto, you go on site and the contractor will get on with it, etc. So I think that what we're talking about, that holistic approach to understanding, procuring, and remaining engaged with the process, it needs to be sort of, I think, be brought back. Again, in the old days, you actually stayed with the project. An architect stayed with the project 5, 6, sometimes 10 years, depending on the scale. So it wasn't that, I do the design and you do the detailing and somebody else will do the site management, etc. And I'm saying this not in a way of sort of happy clappy sort of let's all dance around the fire type of thing, but it goes back to the actual technology of visibility and understanding, in the sense that if the data is there, if this data is accessible for all to see. So if I, as a designer at the front end, I'm tracking a development of a project on site, I have the visibility to then be able to sort of engage and I don't want to say intervene, because contractors hate that, but to be able to actually be part of the development of the project as an overall sort of product. And I think that actually adds value, and it actually does help. So we could go on. I could see by you nodding your head that means you want me to.
No, I was nodding in agreement, but I mean, honestly, I wish we had 2 hours, 3 hours to continue this very engaging conversation, but of course, I do realize you all have to go and have other requirements and things you need to do. Obviously, we all have a lot of meetings these days. So I will end it there. Thank you so very much for the phenomenal, really phenomenal, engaging conversation today. We will have more of these. We hope to have you engaged. I really wanted to touch on 3D printing, and we just didn't have the time to touch on that nearly enough. So in future sessions, we will hope to do that. We will have another session on the 15th of July for those who would like to join us. But without any further sort of limitations, I would like to thank our phenomenal panel for joining us today. Mr. Benjamin Piper from Kilia Design, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Giancarlo Mangone from Symbiosis Planning and Consulting, thank you so much for your time. Kur Salahi from LWK and Partners as well, thank you so much for the phenomenal feedback. And of course, our fantastic moderator for the day, Mr. Andrew from Maxwell Stamp, thank you so much for joining us today from Saudi Arabia as well. Now, that is it from us at the Saudi Build webinar. Thank you all the attendees for joining us today. One final thing before you leave us, please, when you click the Leave Webinar button, you're going to get a quick notification to leave your feedback and comments with us so we can see how you found this webinar. Outside of that, we hope to see you next time. As I mentioned, on the 15th of July, we have a session again on Saudi webinar. And of course, on the 5th to 8th of October, we have the Saudi Build event happening. So we do hope to see you with us there. With that, a massive thank you from us and hope to see you next time.